Throughout Elbaf, we are introduced to a group that will be central to the final saga of the story in terms of antagonists, the Gods Knights.
And as they've demonstrated so far, each member of this group is incredibly strong, vastly experienced, and, more often than not, lacking any sense of remorse or humanity.
And this is the reason that they were so feared by Dragon. To act as the enforcers of the Celestial Dragon's wishes, you have to be a brutal and unforgiving group in every way.
Absolutely, and they all have things that kind of stick out about each individual character, but there is one among them in particular that just seems to stand out even more so when compared to their counterparts, and that being Gunko.
So, we wanted to first look at what makes Gunko so different from the rest of the Gods Knights that we've seen so far. And I think we can start with the most apparent one being the fact that Gunko does not have the Saint title like every other Celestial Dragon Gods Knight that we've seen so far.
Yeah, that was something I didn't even catch on to until you pointed it out, but it is kind of crazy, and that seems to be a big thing, is that their title is so high, but she still doesn't have a saint on her name like everyone else, including the Celestials.
Yeah, Shamrock, Garling, Keringham, Summers, every one of them is saint before that name. But Gunko was just introduced in her title box as Gunko, God's Knight, still very impressive title, but just Gunko. And at first, when you just see her in Shamrock, I don't think you think that much about it, but the more that we see, the more it does kind of seem to stand out compared to the others.
And I mean, it's just such a big part of Celestial Dragons, and just that entire power structure is the fact that they're all saints. So her being the only one without that title definitely doesn't seem like coincidence.
No, it's tied directly into their superiority complex, and I think by looking at it with that logic, we can infer that Gunko was not born a member of the Ultra Elites. She wasn't a Celestial Dragon at birth. Instead, I think it's likely that Gunko was raised into this godly status when she joined the Gods Knights at an invitation, probably very similar to the one they extended to Loki.
And then there's also just how she acts in general. The other Gods Knights seem to have kind of like one setting of how they act. But she's kind of gone all over the board when it comes to how she interacts, just based on the current situation and who she's talking to.
Absolutely. We've seen her fluctuate from incredibly stoic and non-reactionary to probably the most human of the Gods Knights that we've seen so far. Like, for example, while some of her colleagues like Summers are very outwardly sadistic, enjoying the pain of the suffering they're causing, Gunko's very cold and analytical about it. It's almost like it doesn't even affect her at all.
Yes, like she obviously doesn't feel any remorse for these kids could die, whatever, like their lives mean nothing. But she doesn't seem to take any satisfaction out of that like Summers does. It's just kind of a basic fact for her.
It's a job. And at the same time, we've had moments where she is genuinely taken aback with surprise and joy when enjoying something like quality salt with a meal, something that's so menial to other Celestial Dragons.
Yeah, or even something smaller where it's like Summers showing up in his boxers. Like, she had that moment of like kind of blushing at it, like just caught her off guard. She's not outward about it, but she is just like in the moment a little expressive more than you would expect someone like that.
I interpret this as we've seen the version of Gunko that she's trained herself to act like in front of all of these other colleagues. And then at times, even through all of that, the genuine Gunko expression kind of slips through the cracks, even when she doesn't expect to.
Yeah, and I mean, then you've also got some of the guys she works with, like Keringham. He's shown moments where it's like, hey, we should be a little respectful. Sometimes that annoys her, but sometimes that actually maybe helps her be a little more open, and then, you know, not mind sharing something like, oh, I'm listening to music that I enjoy.
Absolutely. However, there are parts of Gunko that are still very sensitive topics and subjects for her, and because of that, that's another reason she seems to stand out in that she's incredibly defensive when it comes to defending her position, her title, or her choices, something that we don't really see from other Celestial Dragons.
No, because they just kind of see it as like their birthright and what they're owed, whereas she definitely feels a need to put it out there that, hey, I'm not just a person, I'm a god, and I'll be treated as such, in a much more like, I have to state it and prove it to you.
And I think this was most apparent in her interaction with Loki, when Loki again and again, despite even physical abuse, was like, no, I will not take that offer. That's gonna make me feel like I'm less than a scumbag than I'm treated like I am now.
And she was like, what do you mean? We're giving you the ultimate opportunity. Why would you not take this?
It almost seems like she received and took a very similar invitation to be greater than human, and to have anybody turn that down just like doesn't compute in her brain, because that has to be the right option.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, there's obviously when Colin called her a human. Like, you will not mistake me for a human. I am a god.
I think that's a great example. I mean, what god has to justify themselves?
Exactly. Like, it's supposed to just be understood, and that's why the Celestials walk around so pompously, is because they know, oh, people will just bow to me. She doesn't do that.
But let's take a look at more of the full picture of Gunko as well, because she's not just different from the God's Knight, she still is her own person. So let's take a look, starting with her name, which you've made a very interesting discovery with.
Yeah, huge shout out to Ajith Kumar, who I just stumbled across this online article kind of in the final little bit of our research. But he pointed out that her name in Japanese translates to army child, and with certain kanji can also refer to a war drum, which both of those very much could have a ton of meaning for her background and her greater role within the story.
And her relationship with Nika, because if
That's
there's one thing we know about Nika is that every time he comes, you hear those drums. So having someone named directly after that almost directly tethers her to the character.
Are you from that, or were you like, what's being the war, like the army that's being liberated against? Either way, it definitely has a meaning. Like, it wasn't by accident.
However, we can also take a look at her devil fruit, which, as we've seen and has been explicitly said to us in the story so far, she is the user of the arrow fruit, but fans will also recognize that her arrows that she's used are incredibly reminiscent of the ones that Emu used to impale Cobra when they were confronted in the throne room.
Yeah, in the exact same way, and now that she's explained, oh, it can't miss, that's the same thing that happened to Cobra.
Yeah, it bends around the whole room.
And it also still got Sabo when he was escaping. He was just able to survive it.
So, for this reason, it might seem like Emu is kind of granting Gunko these powers. She may be the user of this devil fruit at the time, and she seems very well practiced in it, but it might not be authentically own her power even, which is something we've never really seen in the story before.
Right, could be something we don't even realize about how their power structure works. Because that also comes into our next thing, which is the regeneration and abyss making that she shares, much like the Gorosei.
Yeah, we've already seen half of Gunko's body just get entirely blown off by Usopp, and within a matter of seconds, she is piecing herself back together again, just like the Gorosei. Any fatal attack doesn't matter, they're essentially immortal. So, again, this may be a power she is borrowing from Emu, because if they are willing to sell their soul, I'll take a marking that directly links me to you so that I can be transported anywhere and receive these godly powers, but at your will and discretion at all time.
And then on a less serious note, but again, what also makes her so interesting is the more humanizing side of her, which is her fascination with music, specifically Brooks, which is just not something you'd expect from her. But while it might be easy to, at first glance, just pass it off as, oh, she's just enjoying some luxuries of the lower realm, her fascination with Brook may allude to Gunko actually sharing some ideology with the Straw Hats, even if she doesn't want to admit it openly.
Absolutely. I mean, Brooke has a lot of silly songs, but her saying her favorite song is New World, a song that's very focused on the idea of fight for freedom, fight for another tomorrow, fight for a new world.
And I mean, he played it right when he was like, all right, I'm going back to the Straw Hats, like, and we're about to go create a new world.
But when we take all of these personality and background and unique characteristics of Gunko, what exactly does that tell us about where she came from before this moment? And so for this, we wanted to take a look at some popular theories that we've seen from some other creators and present some evidence and significance for each of the main ones that we have to talk about.
And the first being that Gunko may have been a slave and potentially even could be related to Koala.
And for this one, we want to shout out Doc Sake for his video that breaks down this idea in great lengths. We'll be sure to link that in the description below. But the main evidence for this theory is that Gunko's demeanor compared to her colleagues obviously is a bit standoffish, but for her to be so overly stoic and then just barely creep through the real personality and sense of wonder from what she's experiencing, it's very reminiscent of what we saw with Koala when she first met the Sun Pirates, where she was just a working drone, where she will not feel something, she won't complain, she's just going to do what is asked of her out of fear of what's going to happen if she says no.
Right, she doesn't want to seem like a fraud, but then also can't help in those little moments of like, oh, but this is so good, oh, but I just love how this makes me feel. It's still there of like, this isn't always something she's had the ability to enjoy.
No, and if you spend long enough surrounded by these kind of people, and you convince yourself, well, they must be in the right, they have all this power, they have all these nice things, even if you don't deep down agree with it, if you just try and convince yourself over and over again that that's the right thing and you play along, you might end up getting some benefits from it and rising in the ranks like she has, because she's willing to just not really be herself.
Right, and she found a way out. She didn't have to live that life anymore. And yeah, maybe deep down she knows that it's wrong for others to still have that, but she's just accepted like, hey, I got out, I can do better, so that's all that I care about.
This would definitely explain her incredible defensiveness when it comes to regarding her station or her newly acquired sense of superiority. But it would also mean that she's well aware of the atrocities the Celestial Dragons commit, and rather than fight back or make herself a target because she doesn't agree with it, she's just kind of accepted her fate to be the best servant she could possibly be.
And then that also just makes it really interesting of her fear of Nika. Is she even still open to maybe he breaks through that facade and that's why she fears him so much, is, but I know I used to pray to him or something like that, and now it's like she fears retribution for what she's done? Or has she sold out completely, or is there a way that she could somehow again see the light from the Sun God?
Well, I think that honestly might really impact her future in the story. If she spent decades convincing herself that this is the correct choice, I have to be compliant to this, and Nika is this figure of freedom, even in the face of all oppression, that would completely shatter her facade that she has been lying to herself about over and over again. And that's terrifying to somebody, to have your whole worldview pulled out from underneath you. So I think that makes a lot of sense that would be her greatest fear. And if it is put into her face directly with Luffy being there, that could also potentially turn her if she has nothing else to fall back on, like these ideals that she's lied to herself about.
And then onto our next possible theory. This one, big shout out to Teching. There is the possibility that Gunko could be a revolutionary member who just simply turned on her cause, which again would be similar of she turned on what she stood for, just in a different sense, from a different background. She stopped fighting for the people and instead took the power just for herself. But a lot of this theory stems from actually just a very small part of her design.
Absolutely. Which, whenever we see Gunko, she's a unique looking person in general, but one thing that has kind of stood out is that she always has goggles, something that every single revolutionary high captain and officer, I think maybe aside from Ivankov, have at all times on their character, which some people have even speculated might be a result of Dragon using a wind or storm fruit and all of that debris kicking up so they're prepared for that moment.
Yeah, which again, shout out Techie. That's a crazy observation that would make complete sense. Never thought about that, but like, other than Sabo, like, he always had the goggles, but it is crazy because a lot of these guys you wouldn't think need them, but they still have them at all times.
Plus, this would add a huge level of significance to if Gunko had turned on the revolutionaries. That would make sense why Dragon not only knows them, but is incredibly fearful of them if they have information about his revolution, but also could be kind of essential in tying Luffy to bringing him to his father, because in a certain point, their ideals are going to align in this final war of destroying the world government. So if Gunko is the one that brings the two of them together...
I could also see it maybe... And if she doesn't end up on their side, then it's the opposite of, like... She could also know just about Dragon keeping tabs on his kid when he was a child. But either way, yeah, that could actually be a key that we just had no idea was there in the background the whole time.
Yeah, if she ends up being like a linchpin connecting Luffy and Dragon, those are two major characters in this story that really haven't had a reason to interact so far. And I don't think Luffy's really gonna care about meeting his dad, in all honesty. But those two forces joining forces is going to be significantly bad for the world government.
Oh, it's going to be insane. And I mean, he'll probably want to do it more just because Sabo's already with him. But it will be absolutely cataclysmic for the government, for those two, to just become one force.
But let's take a look at our third theory, which is kind of a branch off from our previous two, in more the line of Gunko was potentially a soldier that was just recruited by the God's Knights. We've seen that they reached out to Loki, and obviously that had some societal implications of trying to get the giants too, but she did talk about it like others could receive this invitation, like herself.
Yeah, and I mean, that would also draw back to what her name can translate to in Japanese with the army child. That maybe she was, maybe even similar to Luffy, where she was supposed to be raised like Garp wanted, where like, you're going to be a Marine, you're going to fight with the government, and then she took that and just kept going and just rose to the top.
We've also seen the world government try to recruit strong child fighters. I mean, Mother Caramel's Lamb House literally was selling them off. They wanted Big Mom to be an admiral. They tried to buy Kaido from his kingdom.
Yeah, and so maybe she's the one who like ultimately bought into it and rose through the ranks accordingly.
Absolutely, which would be a huge reason that she not only like receives these different blessings in this title, but she receives direct gifts from Imu because she just bought in fully. So that would explain a lot of why she is the way that she currently is presenting herself.
And this could mean that if presented with a stronger side and like just the idea that, oh, I can't win, I am actually on the losing side, she could potentially turn on the God's Knights and actually join their side. Or on the flip, maybe she feels too far gone, like she's already committed to this, and I mean, it's been her whole life. So she could still also go down with the ship. It could go either way, but I think if she is the military child, it could be one of those things where she's just been trained like a military person is, and she just won't give up and has to follow his orders. Kind of like Garp does, but even more so.
Oh yeah, I mean, I could absolutely see that. The thing that's so interesting is she stands out, but you're not sure which way she's going to be torn to go yet.
Yeah, and I mean, if anyone can change someone, it's Luffy. That's the thing of his character, is people just flock to him. They just get drawn to him and want to follow him. So it would absolutely make sense if anyone on the God's Knights could be turned, it would be her. Especially if it starts to speak to her of like, oh, they just raised me to be this weapon, but I don't have to be.
Mm-hmm. However, we wanted to present one last theory, which I think would make it a fair bit harder to convince Gunko to switch sides.
Yeah, and we didn't get this one from like anyone in particular, just kind of seen it around the internet a little. And that's the idea that Gunko could be either a descendant or even direct offspring of Imu. And I mean, there are some things that you can tie with her arrow fruit power being basically identical to Imu's attack on Cobra, the similar eye design to just Imu and Mihawk, and then also just her greatest fear being Nika. It's just kind of like the same way that Imu is with Joy Boy.
Yeah, an inherited hatred.
Yeah, something she was raised on is like, hey, this is our sworn ultimate enemy.
Mm-hmm. And it's not like the exact same eye design as Mihawk and Imu, but
no, it does have one lesser ring. But maybe it's just she's younger, so she hasn't trained it as much. I don't know.
But it is, we don't have a lot of characters that have something so specifically focused on their eyes.
Exactly.
So it's worth
it is
noting.
Just a good observation, yeah.
But that would be very significant, not only in revealing that Imu has the potential to have offspring and create a family tree.
Yeah, like who's in that family tree? Because already, like, Blackbeard's lineage is special, Luffy's is special, like, what would Imu's be? That'd be crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot to dig into there. But it would also add a lot of significance to, if Gunko falls here, that would have a huge ripple effect on not only the world and the Gods Knights, but if she is descendant from Emu and his descendant is defeated, he's gonna be pissed.
He's going ape shit on that. Well, and then even if, like, and somehow you still get her to turn, it's gonna be the same result. Gonna lose his mind.
True. Yeah, no, that would be a catalyst into bringing the world a lot closer to being flooded entirely.
Yeah, and going into that final war.
But what we can infer about Gunko is that there is a lot of things that make her stand out so far. She is definitely one of one when it comes to the Gods Knights that we've met thus far. But with everything being taken into account, we both wanted to take a chance to present what we think makes the most sense to us personally. And why don't you go ahead and start first?
Yeah, so I think they all do have merit for sure. The one that really sticks out to me is the idea that she is a former Marine and rose through the ranks. And there's just a lot of little things. I mean, obviously it's crazy that her name translates to Army Child, but she could have been the poster child for the Kaidos of the world, where they wanted to raise them with this. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Kaido's fruit was also something that was held by the government. That could be how she got such a powerful fruit that Emu has, is by being raised to use it properly as kind of just like their weapon.
No, you're absolutely correct that the world government was in possession of the Uua no Mi, but it was stolen at God Valley. However, that could have been something they would have presented to somebody they were trying to make like a child soldier.
Exactly. And then also, there's just the fact that the Nika fruit has always evaded them. So while Emu has the arrow fruit and was able to give it to Gunko, the Nika fruit's the one thing that they've never been able to get. So even if she might not know the full background of what that fruit means, or maybe she does, there's also just the fact that she could know, like, hey, this is the one fruit we've never been able to attain. There is more power to it. And so that's why I know to fear it. Mm-hmm. And it's the one thing, because she takes her power very seriously, and that godlike thing, she's afraid of the one god that they can't get a handle on.
No, that would make a lot of sense, that propaganda kind of being installed into her. As for myself, personally, I think the Gunko being a slave makes a lot of sense. I think that she could have still been a revolutionary after that, perhaps.
Yes, those two could both be correct.
But, yeah, I think that her playing along, rising up the ranks, getting better and better treatment because she was very passive and playing along with her masters, I think that makes a lot of sense for the character traits that she displays now, where she's just very much not really displaying a lot of any emotion at most times. And when she does, she's very quick to be like dismissive of not having to defend herself about it. But I think this would also contribute to her fear of Nika, like you had mentioned, because he is the only person in the world at this point that has any power greater than the world government that she knows of. He is the one person that can make all of those years she spent committing herself to horrible people not worth it, because he can actually free people. And with all of that being said, all of those atrocities she was forced to commit, she never would have had to do, and she is terrified to confront that reality.
Absolutely. And as a slave, maybe she even at one point was one of those slaves who cried to Nika, prayed to Nika, and now she fears like retribution for turning on him and taking the opposite route and joining the enemy.
Oh, absolutely. Like a sense of religious guilt could totally play into that. With the release of One Piece's latest chapter, 1149, we received a brief bit of further insight into Gunko's origin and her connection to Brook when prompted by Colin's cry for his own father.
And in that moment, Gunko has what seems to be a previously concealed memory flood back to her as she recalls what appears to be a younger version of herself calling out to her father.
And we don't often see children crying in the story unless there's been something seriously wrong that's happened, so it's likely implying that she was orphaned, either as the result of violence from pirates or a war or just the world government being as evil as they usually are, But regardless, it seems like she was left alone by her parents.
Yeah, my bet's on the latter. It's probably the world government, especially, where she's at now. But in that same flashback, we also see what looks like Gunko remembering an interaction with young Brook from that time, where he shares with her his dream to become a pirate, as they seem to just be dancing along to some music.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Kuma and his dad, like, connecting in that moment too, but in this way, Brook might be a lot more important to Gunko's character, kind of in a similar role to what Saul was to Robin. After all of her immediate family's gone, there's still somebody guiding them in the right direction.
Yeah, and she definitely starts to react like that is the case. Is that Brook? Starts to run to him, but before she can fully, go embrace her old friend, she gets taken over completely, it would seem, by Emu. Both her eyes just flip back. Looks like it's got those ring patterns that we know Emu for, and starts to speak in his voice.
And we've already talked about her eyes having unique pattern, like with one of them being ringed, and potentially this is why, because she's already
they actually have that connection, yeah.
However, with this new information in hand, it's worth looking at how it impacts our previous theories, and luckily for us, this edition actually does not seem to undermine most of the theories we've presented so far, but it does add further evidence towards the idea that Gunko is either an extension of Emu, or potentially a child that they enlisted and brought up within their ranks of the world government after being kind of left alone in this world.
Right, definitely seems like she definitely has a special connection with Emu. I mean, even of the other Gods Knights there, she's the one that got taken control of. And she has the same arrow power, there's a direct connection there. And her being abandoned as a child would leave her without any protection or guidance. And if it was the world government that took over her island, her being captured as a slave or inducted into a child soldier program is still very possible, very much alive.
It kind of reminds me of Nami's original backstory, where her island was in war, but Belmare found these babies and decided to adopt them. And it's lucky for Nami that she did, because she could have shared a very similar fate if she was just left alone on that island.
Right, and maybe she had Brook at one point, but then he went to go be a pirate and she was left alone then. We still don't know, but I feel like we're going to find out. It definitely seems like she wasn't as lucky.
No, the possibility for it is definitely there. However, in terms of Gunko being an extension of Emu, that all but seems like it's not even just a theory anymore, but it seems like it's nearly confirmed. While Gunko might have not been born from Emu, considering we do see her as a child with Brook, it doesn't really eliminate the fact that once she was brought into the world government, she might have been directly appointed to be like a vessel for Emu to go out in the world and see things and still have his impact felt when he stays at Marine Schwa.
Right, and act as kind of his enforcer. And it would also make sense that's why she has those, like, I am a god type of thoughts. Is because she was given these powers, but like, at what cost? Like, she lost her family, she lost everything for this.
It could make sense that if she had all those memories blocked out too, that she's like, I don't even know why I like music or this salt all that much, because she doesn't remember who she is.
Right, she didn't recognize Brook until this moment, but she already loved his music. That was already her favorite song.
Yeah, that's a great point to point out. So, I don't think she was like older than the Gorosei or anything either, because Brook's only like 90.
Yeah.
So she's very recent addition to the world government, but with her being present on the island, the crew's never been closer to Emu, and now they're going to learn a lot more about her and the hidden ruler of the world. But we just threw a lot of ideas at you guys. We hope that some of them might ring true, but feel free to let us know your guys' thoughts on Gunko in the comments below. What you think she came from, what you think she's going to do in the future. Like the video if you enjoyed the discussion. Subscribe if you enjoyed our content and want to come back and see more like this in the future. And as always, be crew.